All right, picture this. Two cavemen lock eyes across a smoky fire pit. One of them leans in, and did they just kiss? Or did one of them just have a piece of mammoth stuck in his teeth and the other was helping out? Today we're diving into one of the weirdest, most surprisingly controversial questions in human history. When did people actually start kissing? And I promise you, the answer is way stranger than since forever. Stick around, because by the end of this, you're going to look at smooching completely differently and you're going to want to wash your hands after, trust me. So let's start with the obvious assumption everyone makes. Kissing feels so natural, so instinctive, that surely it's just hardwired into us, right? Like breathing or complaining about Mondays. Surely our great-great-great-grandparents 100,000 generations back were out there puckering up under the stars just like we do. Well, here's the plot twist. For decades, anthropologists actually debated whether kissing is universal at all. There's a famous study from 2015 that looked at 168 cultures around the world, and guess what they found? Only 46% of those cultures showed any evidence of romantic sexual kissing. Less than half, that means more than half of human societies throughout history either didn't kiss at all or didn't consider it a thing worth doing on the lips. Let that sink in for a second. The thing you probably did yesterday, the thing in literally every romance movie ever made, the thing teenagers panic about before prom, isn't actually a universal human behavior. It's more like a cultural trend. A really, really old trend, but a trend nonetheless. So if it's not hardwired into all of us, where did it come from? Buckle up, because the history of the kiss is a wild ride through ancient clay tablets, possible Neanderthal cousins, royal scandals, and a surprising amount of spit-related science. Yes, spit science. We're going there. Let's go back, way back to where most people assume the story starts. Ancient India. For a long time, the oldest written evidence of kissing came from Sanskrit texts. There are Vedic-era writings, going back over 3,000 years, that describe people sniffing with their mouths. Which sounds bizarre until you realize it's likely an early description of what we'd now call kissing. Ancient Indian texts also describe pressing mouths together, and even something resembling tongue contact, which honestly is impressively detailed record-keeping for something this personal. Then, later the Kama Sutra, written somewhere around the 2nd to 4th century, goes absolutely all in on kissing. It doesn't just mention it, it categorizes it. There are different types of kisses for different moods, different relationships, different levels of, let's say, enthusiasm. There's literally a kiss called the throbbing kiss. I'm not making that up. Ancient scholars sat down and thought, we need to classify these properly. Like kissing was a taxonomy project. Somewhere out there, an ancient Indian scribe was basically the first person to write a kissing tier list, and honestly, respect. For years, this was the leading theory. Kissing as a romantic sexual act started in South Asia and then spread outward, eventually making its way to the Greeks, then the Romans, then across Europe through trade, conquest, and a whole lot of cultural mixing. But then in 2023, a study completely flipped the script. And this is where things get really interesting, so don't go anywhere. A team of researchers, including a Bulgarian Egyptologist and a biological anthropologist from Cambridge, went digging, pun fully intended, into ancient Mesopotamian texts. We're talking clay tablets from Mesopotamia, the region that's now modern-day Iraq, dating back over 4,000 years. Some of these tablets predate the earliest Indian texts about kissing by over 1,000 years. And what did they find? Descriptions of kissing. Not vague, ambiguous, maybe this counts descriptions. Actual, clear depictions of romantic and sexual kissing written in cuneiform, the wedge-shaped writing system pressed into wet clay with a stylus. We're talking about literature describing married couples kissing, and also, intriguingly, texts describing kissing outside of marriage, which apparently was already morally complicated 4,000 years ago. Some things never change, so now the timeline got pushed back. Way back. Kissing was not some niche cultural invention that started in one place and spread like a viral dance trend. According to this research, it was already a well-established, normal part of human intimacy across multiple ancient civilizations independently, way earlier than anyone had given credit for. But here's where it gets even weirder, and this is the part that genuinely surprises most people. The researchers behind that 2023 study didn't stop at kissing is older than we thought. They went further and asked, could kissing be way, way older than even the earliest civilizations? Could it predate modern humans entirely? This is where Neanderthals enter the chat. You probably know that modern humans and Neanderthals interbred. That's not speculation anymore, it's confirmed by genetics. Most people with European or Asian ancestry carry somewhere between 1 and 2% Neanderthal DNA, which means at some point, tens of thousands of years ago, Homo sapiens and Neanderthals were getting close, like very close. And what typically happens before things get that close? Often, kissing. Now, we obviously don't have a cave painting of a Neanderthal and a Homo sapiens making out, as satisfying as that would be for this video. But scientists found something almost as compelling: evidence in our DNA and in the bacteria living in our mouths. There's a genetic and microbial trail. A 2017 study analyzing ancient dental plaque, yes, fossilized tooth plaque from Neanderthal, remains found a specific strain of oral bacteria called Methanobrevibacter oralis. This bacteria is also found in modern humans. And get this, the genetic divergence of this bacteria between Neanderthals and modern humans suggests it was transmitted between the two species somewhere around 120,000 years ago, long after the two lineages had split apart evolutionarily. So how does bacteria jump species like that? Sharing food? Possible. Caring for each other's wounds? Maybe. But one of the most likely explanations, according to researchers, is saliva exchange, which, let's be honest, sounds exactly like what happens during a kiss. So somewhere in the deep, foggy past, a Homo sapiens and a Neanderthal may have shared a kiss, swapped some oral bacteria, and unknowingly left behind a microbial paper trail that scientists would still be talking about over 100,000 years later. If that's not the most awkward yet oddly romantic thing you've heard all week, I don't know what is. This pushes the possible origin of kissing back to before modern humans even fully existed as the only human species on Earth. We're not talking thousands of years anymore. We're talking potentially over 100,000 years, maybe more. Kissing might be older than agriculture, older than written language, older than the wheel, older than most of what we consider civilization. Okay, but let's pump the brakes for a second, because here's a question you might be yelling at your screen right now. If kissing is potentially that ancient, why isn't it universal across all cultures today? Why did that 2015 study find that less than half of cultures practice it? This is actually one of the most fascinating threads in this whole topic. Some anthropologists argue that kissing isn't an instinct at all, it's a learned behavior, a cultural script that gets passed down, modified, sometimes abandoned, and sometimes reinvented depending on the society. Just like clothing styles or table manners, what counts as an intimate or appropriate greeting varies wildly across human cultures. There's actually a really interesting counter-theory here too. Some researchers think kissing might have evolutionary roots that have nothing to do with romance at all. Think about this. In many primate species, including some of our closest relatives like bonobos and chimpanzees, mouth-to-mouth contact is observed, but it's often tied to something else entirely: pre-mastication. That's a fancy word for chewing food and then passing it mouth to mouth to infants, similar to how birds feed their young. It's a survival behavior, not a romantic one. The theory goes that this practice may have evolved over time into a bonding behavior, then eventually morphed culturally into the romantic and sexual kissing we know today. Basically, kissing might have started as ancient baby food delivery and slowly transformed into one of the most iconic gestures of human romance. Somewhere between "let me chew this mammoth meat," "for you, baby," and a Hollywood movie kiss in the rain, evolution and culture had a long, weird collaboration. Honestly, when you think about it that way, kissing's origin story is less instant spark of passion and more extremely slow burn cultural and biological remix that took possibly over 100,000 years to fully cook. Which, relatable, honestly. Some relationships feel exactly like that. Now let's jump forward and talk about how kissing showed up across different ancient civilizations once it started being documented, because the variety here is wild. In ancient Egypt, surprisingly, depictions of mouth-to-mouth kissing are pretty rare in their art. Egyptian hieroglyphics and paintings often show affection through nose-to-nose touching or close facial proximity, rather than direct lip contact. Some historians debate whether this means ancient Egyptians simply preferred a different style of greeting and intimacy, or whether kissing was considered too private to depict publicly. Either way, picture this: an entire civilization that built the pyramids, invented early forms of writing, and mummified cats with full ceremonial honors, but their idea of a tender, intimate kiss might have actually just been rubbing noses. Adorable, but also kind of makes you wonder what their version of an awkward first date looked like. Then you've got the ancient Greeks and Romans, who, let's just say, were significantly more enthusiastic about cataloging kissing than the Egyptians. The Romans in particular got incredibly specific. They had different words for different types of kisses. There was the osculum, a polite kiss often on the cheek, used as a greeting between friends or family. Then there was the basium, a more affectionate kiss. Think close friends or romantic partners. And then there was the savium, a deep, passionate kiss, the kind you definitely wouldn't be doing in front of your in-laws. Romans also had kissing as a social ritual far beyond romance. Political alliances were sometimes sealed with a kiss. Emperors were greeted with ceremonial kisses depending on someone's rank and relationship to them. There was an entire unspoken hierarchy of who got to kiss whom, where, and how. Imagine showing up to a work meeting today and your boss expects a specific ceremonial kiss based on your job title. Absolute chaos. Although, to be fair, probably more interesting than a standard handshake. Now here's a fun historical twist. Despite all this enthusiasm in ancient Rome, kissing actually went through a rough patch in parts of medieval Europe. With the rise of certain religious and social norms, public displays of romantic affection, including kissing, were heavily restricted or considered improper in many contexts. Kissing didn't disappear, obviously, humans are humans, but the cultural attitude shifted dramatically depending on time period, region, and social class. And then, of course, came the absolute game changer in kissing history: disease. Specifically, the spread of certain illnesses through saliva and physical contact began to influence how openly kissing was practiced in public settings throughout history. There are records from various points across history where, during plague outbreaks or periods of fear around contagious illness, communities actually advised against kissing, especially kissing strangers or kissing as a greeting, because, shockingly, ancient and medieval societies eventually figured out that swapping spit might not be the most hygienic life choice during a pandemic. Who knew? This actually connects to something genuinely fascinating from a biological standpoint, which a lot of people don't think about. Kissing isn't just emotionally significant, it might have actually played a role in something called immune system testing. Here's the theory. When two people kiss, especially deeply, they're not just sharing a romantic moment. They're literally swapping bacteria, hormones, and even subtle chemical signals. Some researchers believe that this exchange might have unconsciously helped our ancestors evaluate genetic compatibility with a potential partner. Basically, your body might be running a microbial background check during a kiss without you even realizing it. Romantic, right? Somewhere out there, a caveman thought he was being smooth, and his immune system was quietly doing a compatibility audit in the background. There's also the dopamine and oxytocin angle, which is probably the part of this video where things start to feel a little more familiar. Kissing triggers a release of dopamine, the brain's reward and pleasure chemical, along with oxytocin, often nicknamed the bonding hormone, and even a decrease in cortisol, the stress hormone. So even if early kissing started as some practical, survival-based behavior involving food sharing or hygiene checking, it eventually got hijacked, evolutionarily speaking, by our brain's reward systems, and turned into something we now associate purely with romance, comfort, and connection. Basically, evolution looked at this weird, possibly food-sharing, possibly bacteria-testing behavior and said, you know what, let's also make this feel amazing. And thus, kissing as we know it today was fully born. Now let's circle back to that controversial 2023 study because there's actually some pushback worth mentioning, and this is important if we want the full picture here. Not every researcher agrees with the Neanderthal kissing theory or the idea that the Mesopotamian texts definitively prove ancient romantic kissing as we define it today. Some scholars argue that without clearer, more direct evidence like detailed art or extremely explicit written descriptions, we're sometimes interpreting ambiguous ancient language through a very modern lens. What one researcher reads as clear evidence of romantic kissing, another might read as a more general expression of affection, or even just a formal greeting. This is actually a really important reminder about how historical and anthropological research works. We're often looking at fragments, clay tablets with missing pieces, ancient texts written in dead languages with words that don't perfectly translate into modern concepts, and trying to reconstruct entire cultural behaviors from limited evidence. It's less like reading a clear historical record, and more like assembling a 4,000-year-old jigsaw puzzle where half the pieces are missing and some of them might belong to a completely different puzzle entirely. So where does that leave us? Here's the honest answer. We don't have one single, perfectly clean, undisputed moment in history where kissing was invented. What we have instead is a layered, messy, fascinating timeline. Possible deep evolutionary roots tied to feeding and bonding behaviors going back potentially over 100,000 years. Possible cross-species transmission with Neanderthals based on genetic and microbial evidence. Clear documented evidence of romantic and sexual kissing in Mesopotamian texts over 4,000 years ago. Highly developed kissing culture and classification systems in ancient India through texts like the Kama Sutra, elaborate social and political kissing rituals in ancient Rome, shifting cultural attitudes through medieval Europe, influenced by religion and disease. And finally, the modern understanding of kissing as deeply tied to brain chemistry, bonding hormones, and even subconscious biological compatibility testing. It's not one invention. It's an evolutionary and cultural remix that's been happening for possibly over 100 millennia, constantly reshaped by biology, geography, religion, health crises, and pure human desire for connection. And honestly, isn't that kind of beautiful in a weird, slightly gross bacteria and clay tablet kind of way? This tiny act, pressing your lips against someone else's, something so many of us do without even thinking twice about it, carries this insanely deep, layered history. It might connect us all the way back to a moment in deep prehistory where two different species of humans looked at each other and, for reasons we'll probably never fully understand, decided to get a little closer than usual. So next time you're kissing someone, whether it's a partner, a family member on the cheek, or honestly even just thinking about the concept while watching this video alone at 2 in the morning, no judgment. You can think about the fact that you're potentially participating in a tradition or a behavior or a biological impulse that might stretch back over 100,000 years, through Neanderthals, through ancient Mesopotamian poets, through Roman emperors demanding ceremonial kisses, through medieval plague doctors telling everyone to please stop swapping spit for a while. Kissing has survived evolution, disease, religious restriction, cultural taboos, and centuries of changing social norms. And it's still here, still happening. Probably millions of times across the world in just this one single day. So, what do you think? Does it surprise you that kissing might not be a universal human instinct after all? Does the Neanderthal connection completely change how you think about deep human history? Drop your thoughts down in the comments. I genuinely want to know which part of this blew your mind the most. And if you made it all the way to the end of this one, smooching through over 100,000 years of human history with me, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because we are just getting started uncovering the strange, surprising, and surprisingly weird origins of the things we do every single day without even thinking about them. Until next time, stay curious.